Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, May 1st, 2024. Yes, it's May Day, and things happened last night that I wish would happen every May Day and had happened during the May Days of the 20th century, but we will get to that in a minute with my colleagues here. I'm, of course, John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, Abe Greenwald, executive editor. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John. Well, those things may happen every day this May.
Fair enough. But May Day is, of course, a special communist holiday. So seeing communists rousted is just a gift. It's a gift to the senior editor, Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John. And yes, it's historically accurate.
That's exactly. And of course, back from vacation, Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John. And I just want to say in the Zoom chat, you will see my list of demands before I leave the podcast today. I expect those demands to be met.
All right. I'm going on Uber Eats. I'm going to send you an acai bowl.
Yes, please.
And maybe a Beyond
make
Burger.
Sure the banana is individually packaged. There are people here in AI who don't like the bananas. We need to keep them separate.
Okay.
And there's several other pages of demands to follow.
I understand. No brown M&Ms, and of course, vegan chicken fingers. And I mean,
to have the comfort piglet. Make sure that she's comfortable through the entire transit to my.
I just want to say that our listeners can't see it, but it's a beautiful tent that Matt is in.
It's really nice. It's like it sort of looks like a pasha's tent, actually. Sort of like where that guy in Lawrence of Arabia is lounging when they bring Lawrence in to meet him. Anyway, we are in an unaccustomedly good mood here this morning because, of course, some of us spent much of last night watching order being restored on the Columbia and City College campuses just a mile from me, or a mile and a half from me here, and 2 miles from me here in New York City. There was a hilarious sort of conflict or contrast between the systematic, careful, deliberate way in which the NYPD came to the Columbia campus, set up zones and areas in which the press was kept, in which they marched out the people from the tent encampment as it was being taken down. And of course, this now, to me, indelible image of this armored RV fire truck kind of black thing that they drove up to Hamilton Hall on the Columbia campus, hoisted up the ladder to the second floor, and then cops in riot gear carefully walked up the ladder, carefully opened up a window, and had to slide into the building in order to enter it without getting into a confrontation at the front door with the protesters, and then, of course, led them out with all kinds of false nonsense charges being made, like they were using tear gas. Apparently, they were using something called a distraction device, which I think is just something that makes a big boom, but has no other.
It's a cell phone. It's just a cell phone.
Things
with Instagram. They hold up a cell phone with Instagram on it. That's the distraction device.
What is that thing on Christmas? Like you pull it and it goes pop, like it's a Christmas thing. Like makes a popping noise. Anyway, it's sort of like a big version of that. And by I think 2:00 in the morning, the Columbia campus had been liberated from the liberators of the Palestinian people. So I was reading last night. I just want to share with you the outrages that were being expressed toward the behavior of the NYPD and the Columbia administration. There is a professor at Columbia named Carl Jacoby, a historian, who I needless to say is a historian of Native American, viciousness and monstrousness and all that. The monstrousness toward the Native Americans, of course, not the other way around. Carl Jacoby says, why would Columbia and NYPD plan to raid the student sit-in at night when it is dark? And the risk of injury to undergrads and police would seem to be much higher. Gee, I don't know, because it's dark. And therefore, the people who are actually advancing on the protesters have the advantage in the dark. And then he says it's outrageous that the board and everybody shouldn't have consulted the faculty first, because the Columbia bylaws say that you have to. According to Columbia bylaws, police are not supposed to be allowed on campus without the consent of the faculty. President Shafiq does not have our approval for this raid. She has not even asked our approval. This promises to be a horrifying dereliction of faculty governance. So most of the protesters who were arrested inside Hamilton Hall have been charged with burglary. Burglary is a felony. You don't have to ask the faculty's permission. You don't have to ask Banouk Shafiq's permission. You don't have to ask, I don't know whose permission, and you certainly don't have to ask Carl Jacoby's permission when he gets up from his drum circle.
There's video of them using a hammer to break the glass to the door to let themselves in.
Well, you see, that's only illegal.
That's only illegal
on January 6th, Matt. I'm sorry. That's the special January 6th rule that says that only when it happens on January 6th is that illegal. Otherwise, it could be just an expression of tomfoolery and hijinks on the part of the delightful young people.
The banner reading Intifada hung from the scaffolds of Hamilton Hall. That's hijinks, undergraduate hijinks.
It's just like when, they throw the marbles, on the parade marchers in Animal House. It's just delightful, the irrepressible youth being so wonderfully irrepressible.
Can we point out that the events of last night, I think, reinforce something we've been saying on the podcast for a while, which is, the old saying, the first time tragedy, second time farce. This was not 1968. This was not the bashing heads in riot on campus. The NYPD was amazingly effective and professional, and they disbanded the camp. It was pretty amazing how just quickly and efficiently the order was restored on campus. And it only shows that if Shafiq had stuck to her guns at the beginning of this, she would never have been put in the situation she finds herself in now, where I think her job is definitely in jeopardy.
But what's interesting here is that because she didn't stick to her guns at first, she gave the protesters time to really show the world what they're really about. So they by the time they got done burgling and putting up their Intifada signs and praising the martyrs and asking for humanitarian aid,
accosting that facilities employee.
Right. But by the time they got done with all that, they left no question for the average American, even the ones who don't care about politics, not interested in foreign policy, don't have kids in school. Everyone got to see, oh, these are morons or monsters. Mm-hmm. We're done.
Mm-hmm. There's a story that Nora Ephron tells in an essay she wrote about the apartment building that she lived in, which is called the Apthorpe. It's a magnificent building on the Upper West Side, full block with a giant courtyard in the middle. And she moved in, and then Rosie O'Donnell moved in, and other friends of hers moved in. And Rosie O'Donnell got into a fight with another tenant, and things got very heated, as you can imagine, since Rosie O'Donnell is a psychopath. And the cops were actually called in, and a cop showed up to see what he could do to separate Rosie O'Donnell from this neighbor. And this fight was going on, and this cop looked around this magnificent apartment building and said, "I don't know what's wrong with you people. I would kill to live in this building." Just a working class guy lives in Smithtown, Long Island or something. He goes into this palace and sees these people behaving like defiant school children. And his response is, how dare you? Kind of like, how dare you? When you see the footage from last night and that girl, Johanna Slutsky, saying, feed us, you better feed us, or, do you want us to starve and die?
Right. That was the press conference in the afternoon,
right,
prior to the retaking of Hamilton Hall.
You're like, what is wrong with you? Is there something, what morally, this whole thing that we talked about for decades and Bill Buckley wrote about and Jonah Goldberg writes about all the time, which is, where is the gratitude for living the lives that we live in the 21st century with all of this bounty and glory, and instead everybody has grievances and is against it and all of that? I mean, you really see that here in this attitude. It is, you are trashing this place. This is a place that's been there for 250 years. It is an institution of higher learning. You were lucky to get into it since that is a 3% acceptance rate, if in fact you are a student and not just an agitator. And this is what you do to it. This is what you do to the education that you're paying for. This is how you handle political matters that you are upset about. What is the matter with you? How are you going to get through a fight with your wife or your husband when you have a significant difference of opinion in your marriage or something?
I think the marriage prospects are rather slim for some of these people, John. But contrast that, as you say, contrast that sense of entitlement with the cops. Diverse, working class, many of them I know, the children of immigrants, if not immigrants themselves. They're doing their job. They have to come in and act like adults because no one else will. And because Shafiq's policy of appeasement there for the past few weeks ended in disaster with this takeover. Well, I agree with Abe, while also somehow inadvertently allowing the protesters to show their true face. Of course, they're always masked.
I once had a boss who was came from India, and he talked about the fact that when he went to Tulane, that was his big break to come to America. And he was a student, and it was during the Vietnam War, right around there. And he talked about how he had to. They were told, don't even walk behind protests, anti-war protests, in case you get caught on TV, right? On a camera sees you, like you're here on a student visa. You have no idea how lucky you are, all that stuff. And he was like, I had to keep my nose as clean as possible. And then he got drafted because, he got drafted into the National Guard or whatever. And he called his father, and and he said to his father, I just left Southeast Asia. Like, this was my escape. I came to America, and they're going to hand me a gun and send me back. As it happened, he didn't end up he said he was sent to a National Guard base and not to Phnom Penh, where many of his classmates were. But, his point was like, I came here to go to school. I can't be seen anywhere in like a half-mile vicinity of a protest. And then they handed me a gun and said, you might need to go to Phnom Penh and defeat communism and then come back and finish your degree. And he was like, the things that I had to go through to be American, to stay in America, it was like a survival reality show. And so he was always,
I think this is a very deep point, because of course we have this massive projection game going on, and has been going on the part of the American left for the last 15 years. Like, what is the great charge of wokeness against the larger society and its power structure, right? Privilege. It's you have white privilege, you have this privilege, you have that privilege, and the privilege is bad, and your privilege needs to be called out and ended, and your privilege needs to be replaced by another system, maybe that privileges others, since the only way anything is going to happen is through a system of privilege. You had white privilege, now there'll be LGBTQ privilege, or there'll be, African American privilege or something like that in order to right the balance. But I mean, the privilege that is being displayed and has been displayed here for 15 years with this kind of woke mentality on campus that has now found its fullest expression is privilege. It's rich kids and people who get scholarship money in the tens of thousands a year in order to attend these schools, acting as though they are, at a lunch counter in the South in 1957. They are unjustly taking on the place of people who genuinely and legitimately suffered, and who went through an enormous amount of personal trouble and tumult and upset and physical threats to their lives in order to expand their rights.
Well, they're also
go ahead. Sir.
They're also taking the place of occupied peoples. I mean, that's how they see themselves, right? They get rid of the N95 and put a keffiyeh around their face, and then they describe Colombia's communiques with them as being like the leaflets that Israel drops before bombing Gaza. And then they ask for humanitarian aid and claim, starvation and dehydration. They are cosplaying their fantasy Palestinians.
Yeah, my kids run around with wands after reading Harry Potter together, and this is I know that there's a long running not really joke where people on the left compare everything to Harry Potter, but this is my Harry Potter comparison is throwing on kids throwing on a robe and picking up a wand, and that's what this is. And the funniest part is that they don't have we're constantly told they are kids or kid-ish, and then we're told listen to them. And because they're not just kids, or because they're the future and we should listen to kids, don't call them kids. But even if they are kids, we should listen to the kids. There's no consensus among their supporters as to why we should care what they think. There's like a scrambled sort of well, you should, but they're kids. Well, you should listen to kids. Well, we don't really listen to kids. They don't really. Well, they're not kids. They're adults. They're 18. They can buy cigarettes. So you should listen. We went through this whole thing.
They can't even buy cigarettes.
I do. I mean,
you got to be 26 to buy cigarettes now.
There is a certain insidious aspect to all of this, which we shouldn't downplay or ignore. I've been away, so I haven't had an opportunity to comment on Ilhan Omar's vile remarks after she visited most recently the Columbia campus and the tents there, where she distinguished between pro-genocide Jews and anti-genocide Jews. And this disgusting idea that somehow, pro-Israel people, Jewish or not, are somehow for genocide, or the completely absurd notion that there is a genocide taking place inside the Gaza Strip, or the broader argument of these student encampments. It's not actually tied to Gaza even. They're calling for an end to the occupation, by which they mean an end to Israel. Or their calls, in some cases successful, for the universities to pursue a divestment from the Israeli economy. All of that is a much more, I think, insidious program that can be obscured by just the immaturity and idiocy and obvious mental and psychological problems of many of these students. So we have to kind of keep both ideas in our head at the same time. I guess that's why the phrase "useful idiot" was coined by Stalin. He understood that you could get a lot, you could smuggle a lot bad in
Yeah.
through kind of just naive goofs.
Right. Well, so Ms. Slutsky saying, send me food because I'm hungry is the useful idiot. And the person who is working for an NGO paid for by George Soros, who is helping logistically to figure out how to get new tents there when the tents are taken down, and how to write down a series of rules, and how to tell them, because what do they know? They're not logistics people. How to keep press out, what means and maneuvers you can use, how to blockade and barricade something like these aren't people who've been in the military. They're not soldiers. They don't know anything. They're being given instruction manuals by somebody, and they're the useful idiots who are carrying it out with the participation, as Minouche Safik and Eric Adams said yesterday, of an extraordinarily large number of, quote, outside agitators.
Which was another thing they were saying, by the way. They were saying the bad people, bad things happening are going on outside the gates. The things going on inside the gates are good. The people inside are good. The people outside are bad, and never the twain shall meet. And then it becomes clear that the so-called bad people are on campus too. And so this is also like the other argument, which is that the inconsistency is the campus sealed off from outside agitators or not. The people in the camp say yes, so leave us alone. And then bad things happen, and people camp say, well, it's outsiders who got in. And so they said, the school says, okay, well, let's bring the cops and get trespassers out of there. And they go, no, why would you do that to students?
Yeah. Well, look, we know, and there was a whole kerfuffle over this last night and how terrible it was that somebody was saying this. Somebody said there's a terrorist on campus right now. So this was an elision, but on campus, we saw a picture because it was posted on Twitter by a man named Sami Al-Arian. Sami Al-Arian was a professor at Florida Polytechnic University, and was convicted, pled guilty to being a financier in 2005 for Palestine Islamic Jihad, which, as we may know, is one of the groups that actually held hostages, ran in with Hamas into the Gaza envelope and took some of the hostages. And there was a very long and elaborate process in which charges were dismissed and then they were reinstated. He was finally deported to Turkey in 2015. And he posted a picture the other day of his wife, who was in her 60s, sitting in a tent on the Columbia campus, providing solidarity for the wonderful suffering students who were agitating for the Palestinian liberation. She is not a student in Columbia. She is not a professor at Columbia. She has no connection to Columbia. She has a son-in-law who is a repugnant professor of Arab propaganda at Georgetown, but let her go to Georgetown and be snuck in by. That means somebody snuck her in. Like, there's a basement hallway. I mean, Matt, you went to Columbia, so maybe somebody opened a door and let her in, and she was there on campus. Now, is she a terrorist? She's terrorist adjacent. She may not herself be an actual terrorist, but she alone makes the case that, yeah, there were people there who did not have the right to be there. Like, you can't tell when you see old people in the pictures of people on the quad whether they're Columbia employees or Columbia professors or something like that. But yesterday afternoon, or Tuesday afternoon, when the encampments were supposedly to be shut down forever, right, at 2:00, Abe and I watched this on TV, and there was this kind of incredibly lame march around the campus from the south lawn to the north lawn in a big kind of cube circle. And there weren't many people there, maybe 100, 150, just walking around and around and around. And, half of them were like 45 to 50 years old. Now, I don't know who they were. As I say, they could have been the entire political science department. It could have been,
I mean, it's also located on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. But you know that there are just people who were
right.
But the
campus was locked down, right? The campus was
locked down. There was a video
since Friday. So
there was a video of somebody who works at the theological seminary at Columbia or something, one of those institutions, leading people in, and people
right,
on
that's right. The
camera.
Union
There's a
Theological
hidden
Seminary.
saying like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah,
Right.
Or the
we're
School of
with this
Social
person."
Work. It's a massive university.
So
I
like
mean,
faculty,
Oh.
the point is that faculty they weren't just faculty, they were people who were let in by faculty. It wasn't like
That's my
students,
point. Right.
you
So
know,
the
took
idea
one
that
of
there
those wire
weren't,
cutters and cut a hole in the fence. It was like
yeah.
faculty were like, "Here's my pass. Here are my
Yeah.
guests," and bring in 5 people to
Well,
protest.
the entirety of Columbia, like a lot of quads like this, is connected by underground passageways, which is where, the garbage gets mysteriously taken. So nobody has to look at it. It's like Disney World or something. Like, there's a whole underground city where all of the works are kept. And if you know your school, you know how to get around underground, like when there's 20 inches of snow. And they're all connected, and the Union Theological Seminary isn't even on the campus. It's across the street at 120th on the other side of Broadway, but I think they are connected. I think there are ways to get from one to the other. Anyway, I don't want to lose the thread here. So the encampments were taken out of Columbia, but things got very hairy at UCLA yesterday. These are all reports. It's hard to tell through the fog of battle, but a Jewish woman was apparently beaten up or knocked unconscious, after which activist Jewish students started attacking the encampments. There are claims that they were firing fireworks or flares into the camp. I will not believe. I'll believe what I see when I see it or hear it. But by the way, it's City College, we should say. So City College is literally a mile up from Columbia on Amsterdam Avenue, and it is a public university. Is of course famously where the Trotskyists turned neocons all went to school in the 1930s and 40s, including Matt's grandfather-in-law, Irving Kristol, and Nathan Glazer and Daniel Bell and a bunch of other people. Anyway, so City College is this free public university run by the city, and none of it is private ground. So, and there are no one lives there because it's a commuter school. They don't have dorms. So campus is open. The cops are free to do whatever the cops need to do. And the demonstrators got violent with the cops. I mean, the demonstrators started throwing the giant water bottles that go in those, Poland Spring dispensaries at the cops and pushing them. And so the cops just threw them down on the ground and started zip tying them, after being hit. At which point you could see footage of other agitators running and trying to crash into the cops to distract them so that the person could get away, and then stumbling and then crashing to the ground on Amsterdam Avenue, and then also getting zip tied. And so it did get violent, and it was not the police. And this is why it's not Kent State, and this is why it's not 1968. Kent State involved National Guardsmen being placed face to face with a giant demonstration. Who were those National Guardsmen? They were 18, 19-year-old kids avoiding service in Vietnam and serving their country in another way. They were scared out of their minds. Things were going crazy, and a couple of them fired off guns, and 4 people got shot and killed. They were either given an order or they weren't. When it's not clear. What was clear was that they were ill-trained. They were kids themselves facing these other kids. The NYPD is the best trained police force on the planet Earth. It wasn't 50, 60 years ago. It is now. It is an astonishingly well-trained police force. Every cop that was there in riot gear has spent months training in riot gear. They're not just put this helmet on and go in and knock some heads. They have riot squads, they have bomb squads, they have anti-terrorism squads, they have everything.
They have that cool thing with the ladder.
The cool thing with the ladder. Yeah. So altogether, it wasn't good. It's never going to be Kent State if you bring in the NYPD. Never. because they know how to do this. And once you say, okay, you go in and do it, they're like, okay, we have a plan. We're going to bring the giant RV with the ladder. We're not going to bother with trying to get through the front door because they've barricaded it. So we're going to go in through a window on the second floor. And assuming that they don't have guns and don't shoot us as we come through the window, this will make quick work of them. And they did.
And this is, by the way, something that people, in the defund the police discussions that we've been having now for, going 3.5 years, 4 years now. It was even part of the 2020 election. This is part of the thing that people don't understand, which is that actually, if you fund the police and train them and give them what they need, there's this misunderstanding that they're just giving them those MRAPs, which are like tanks, right? That police are just being given MRAPs and they're rolling, into Ferguson or whatever with these, which a sheriff did ridiculously. But actually, what happens if you fund the police? They train and they prepare and they go in with high enough numbers, right? One of the things that people were complaining about on Twitter were, why so many cops? So can you believe how many cops? I've never seen so many cops in my life. This is what people were saying. Yes. And they went in because they had enough cops and they're peacefully, brought everybody out without incident. And that's what you want. That's why you fund the police. And that's part of what gets lost in this discussion, which is this
such
belief
a good
that
point.
the more you fund the police, the more they'll roll in with tanks and, and like shoulder mounted, missile launchers or something. But this is actually what happens when you properly
and certainly when you're talking about the NYPD, right?
Yeah.
Which is one of the best police force, I think, in the country. But I think we should zoom out, though, just a little bit, because as this was happening at Columbia and it was happening at UCLA, it's happening at UT Austin, Northwestern, there was, again, another appeasement strategy. And also in, I think, Brown, the same thing. Think about what Biden is doing. But first of all, I saw the video yesterday of the new strategy that Biden's aides have when he has to walk. Literally, when he has to walk from his door to the helicopter on the South Lawn, Biden is now surrounded by aides so that you cannot see him in distress because he walks with difficulty.
Yeah, it's a phalanx. It's what the Romans would have called a phalanx.
Of Anita Dunn.
They go in the circle.
It's the most pathetic phalanx in the world because it's Bruce Reed, Anita Dunn, Tom Donnellan, and the bagman from Veep surrounding Biden as he shuffles so that you can't see him. This is the president of the United States. It's the most absurd thing I've ever seen.
Hey, he broke his foot 4 years ago.
Yeah.
He broke his foot, Matt. He broke his foot, so it's it's a little hard for him to walk.
Remember when Bill Clinton fell down while partying with Greg Norman, like in the last year of his presidency, and he had to have crutches? Clinton had much more dignity than Biden does, sans crutches, even to just shuffle. They're
first of all, just a fact check.
him.
Biden broke his foot saving his uncle from cannibals.
Yeah, right.
Just to be clear, that's how
the dog commander bit his foot. Or they didn't remember he slipped. Yeah, I think chasing the dog. In any case, they're hiding him from us. And what does he do today? I wake up to the announcement that he is forgiving more student debt. He's forgiving more student debt in the midst of America looking at their television screens and saying, what a bunch of entitled, mentally addled brats we're raising in these universities. And Biden is forgiving them, is paying them off. And moreover, he has been silent throughout all of this. He has been silent. And, as they said of Taylor Swift, when she refused to condemn Trump in 2017, Biden's silence speaks volumes.
I'm not. You have now achieved perfect pop culture analogy. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go from that. So I'm going to go to an ad because that was so good. Okay. I went online last night to find whatever I could find about what was going on in Colombia, and I was reminded that going online without ExpressVPN is like using your smartphone without a protective case. Most of the time, you'll probably be fine, but all it takes is one accidental drop onto solid concrete to make you wish you had protected yourself. I myself was watching a lot of like weird communist YouTube feeds, and God only knows who might be tracking those. So, in fact, my ExpressVPN was on, and so at least I am shielded from the horrible consequences of providing such people, even though they had cameras inside the encampments, any kind of audience that can track me. So, look, every time you connect to an unencrypted network in cafes, hotels, airports, your online data is not secured. Any hacker on the same network can gain access and steal your personal data. And it doesn't take much technical knowledge; just some cheap hardware is needed. A smart 12-year-old could do it. Hackers can make up to $1,000 per person selling personal info on the dark web. So, ExpressVPN creates an encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. It's super secure. It'd take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to get past ExpressVPN's encryption. Easy to use. Fire up the app and click one button to get protected. And it works on all devices, phones, laptops, and more, so you can stay secure on the go. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/commentary. That's expressvpn.com/commentary. And you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/commentary. Abe, Winston Churchill in 1943, after the first victory of the Allies against the Nazis at Al Alamein, said, "The Germans have received back again that measure of fire and steel which they have so often meted out to others." Now, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. Famous speech, 1942. What I wanted to ask you is, what we saw last night, is it even the beginning of the end? I'm not sure it is, because
as we speak,
yes,
tents are going up at Fordham University.
Well, I think they've occupied a building at Fordham.
Yeah.
At Fordham, the Lincoln Center. They don't have to, because they don't want to go all the way up to the Bronx. Fordham has two campuses, and you have to get on the train, and you have to get off. Nope. And by the way, the people in the Fordham neighborhood are Italians and Albanians and others, and they're not going to hold with this nonsense of your tents and everything. So they just went and they occupied a building at Lincoln Center, because then they can go out, get themselves some delicious food at PJ Clark's and Bar Boulud and other places.
We are nowhere near the end. I'm with you. I don't even think we're near the end of the beginning. Because it's getting warmer. This is Occupy weather. This is BLM weather. This is globalized intifada weather. Yeah, do the right thing weather is right. Also because this is like a copycat crime. These kids are getting in the news. They look like rebels. They're living out their fantasy life on screens, on TikTok, on whatever. So they're all in on it now. This is going to spread and spread and spread. Plus, as we've said, good chance Israel is going to go into Rafah, finish that job. They're going to have to respond in some sense. Not that I think there's a one-to-one correlation between what happens in Israel and what they're doing over here. I think it's become a runaway phenomenon on its own. But no. We're nowhere near the end.
So what does that mean? So, school's ending in the next couple of weeks at almost everywhere in America. I'm distressed to see a tent city encampment go up at my alma mater, the University of Chicago, which seems to have largely avoided these kinds of awful controversies. And now the relatively new presidential administration is going to have to do something about it. The prior administration under Robert Zimmer, who tragically died of cancer last year, would I doubt have been would have allowed this to start in the first place. But let's say school ends and it's June. So one thing I wanted to mention, because I'm bouncing all over the place, there's a rent-a-mob quality to what is going on now. What happened at Columbia was the cops started moving out of Columbia. So the people who are outside the gates, right, and couldn't walked up to City College. So they're not students. They're just like freelance. I got off the subway from the Atlantic Avenue stop in Brooklyn at 116th Street. I guess I'm going to walk up to 137th Street and make trouble here. And you know what? The cops are breaking this up. Let me go down to Fordham at 62nd. It's all on the same subway line, people.
It's like
It's
the
all
ones who
on the
follow
one.
fish.
116,
They follow fish around the
137,
country.
66th Street. Like, they're just now wandering around the city, being encampers or fellows of encampers. And that is what the long hot summer is like. Because once it is actually separated from the campuses, then you actually have a free speech problem in the United States, by which I mean, if you Hyde Park it, if you agitate and speak, authorities find it very difficult to break it up. There are all kinds of protections for things that are viewed as free speech. For example, in New York City, if you want to sell books on a sidewalk, you can take a blanket, put the books on the sidewalk, on the blanket, and a cop can't roust you out because you're selling books. Books are speech. You are therefore participating in the distribution and promulgation of free speech. If you sell socks, they can take you out if they want to, but they cannot take you out if you're selling books. So there are weird ordinances and statutes that involve how the First Amendment is read that could make this insupportably difficult. And of course, it'll all happen in blue cities where the police and the prosecutors don't want.
And I just want to say,
intervene.
there are going to be permutations and innovations on this on the part of the protesters that we're not going to anticipate. You know, who knows? We didn't anticipate the tent encampment itself, right? It's going to change. It's going to evolve, and it's going to drive the people who live among these things crazy. And it's going to further discredit the protesters, and it's going to further make Biden's pandering to them look absurd.
Right.
I can attest to that, because if you've ever been at a concert at Central Park Summer Stage, okay, and I once saw David Bowie come on to stage at a concert at Central Park Summer Stage, and the neighbors wanted the NYPD to shut it down or turn the music down. So if they'll tell David Bowie to turn it down, they will tell the protesters to turn it down. But also, isn't this the prelude to what we have now? I mean, didn't we see these protests since October 7th through the streets first before all this came to campus, right? I mean, we saw the falafel shop, we saw the Jewish-owned, Israeli-owned restaurant in Philadelphia mobbed. We saw
Matt, this is an important point that
glass
Seth is
broken
making.
and
I think that the grievous mistake here, again, I keep talking about Biden's mistake and how he's handled this whole thing and where he should have positioned himself for the best result for him in November. But the freeze of the war, and particularly the killing of the 7 food workers, was the accelerant here. Like, I think the 10 cities went up almost immediately after the World Food Kitchen, or what, the Global Food Network, or the
World
Jose
Central
Andres
Kitchen.
self-loving
You've had trouble with this
onanistic organization. Because I don't want to know. Anyway,
Andres Inc.
Andres Inc. Anyway, I think that's when it all really accelerated, and this is where you see the consequences of if you move relentlessly, the focus of the story can't be, there's nothing else to talk about, so maybe we can open up a tent city.
Right. Well, the war, it's worth talking about the war just briefly, because it has gone in some strange directions. The war in Gaza is essentially on pause. It's been on pause since before Passover. In the middle of that pause was the Iranian attack on Israel, a hugely epical event, which people, of course, have moved beyond with great rapidity. And this, again, just reminds me how the protests on campus are divorced from any realities or facts on the ground. I mean, it's a total kind of Palestine of the mind that inspires these people, these students or these activists or whatever they are, the members of the Al-Arian family. That's not about what's happening on the ground, because quite frankly, nothing really is happening on the ground. There are some softening tactics being used in Rafah, targeted strikes. There are eruptions of violence in central Gaza and in northern Gaza from time to time. Meanwhile, our Secretary of the State is in the region, again, insisting on some type of hostage deal for a ceasefire, saying accurately that the ball is in Hamas's court, and yet it's like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football, because the ball's been in Hamas's court for, I don't know, 7 months, and Hamas rejects the ceasefires, with the one exception last
Yeah, but man,
autumn.
it's such a good deal. Tony Blinken, they keep saying what a great deal it is.
Well, then the other
Hamas
thing
should
that he
take the
keeps
deal.
saying is, with Israel and the aid, Israel has to let in more aid. More, how much aid can you? It's just going to be pallets and pallets of aid in Gaza. That's all that's going to be left. I mean, you see these trucks, you see these. We're America's dropping aid on the ground. We're building the pier in the Mediterranean that we're going to set up. The Jordanians now are putting aid through another crossing. Aid. It's nonstop. And yet, what
Also,
happens to the aid? Hamas takes the aid.
We had to divert some of the aid to Colombia, to that poor woman at the microphone.
Well, she's on the meal plan.
hungry.
The best part of her comment was, look, guys, don't you get it? I'm on the meal plan. So you owe it to me. I've prepaid my meals.
Yeah.
And plus, the dining hall's right across the plaza from Hamilton Hall.
Yeah.
Not too hard to just schlep some meals over there.
Okay, I got another pop culture analogy for you. Monty Python's Flying Circus, the Dennis Moore sketch. So Dennis Moore is basically Robin Hood, right? So he robs from the rich and he gives to the poor. And as the sketch goes on, he just keeps robbing from the rich and he keeps robbing from the rich. And by the end of the sketch, the poor is sitting there going, "God, you bring me a diamond. I don't have enough diamonds." And then the song, which had gone, Dennis Moore, he robs from the rich and gives to the poor, Dennis Moore, like that. And then the last line of the song is, he robs from the poor and gives to the rich, stupid beat, ITCH, Dennis Moore. I mean, it's getting to that point. It's like, Hamas is like, I don't know what to do with all of this chocolate.
I don't mean to laugh. It's so much. It's so absurd. Our policy is so absurd that all the headlines are, "Oh, Anthony Blinken making another trip to the region." How many trips has this guy made? In a column a few months ago, I called it shuffle diplomacy, because all he does is he shuffles from one country to the next and says, "Why won't Hamas take the ceasefire?" I know why. Because they're a genocidal death cult that needs to be destroyed, Anthony. Get with the program here.
Yeah, I don't understand why he doesn't take the lesson from his predecessor in a previous Democratic administration, Warren Christopher, who was the first Secretary of State to Bill Clinton, and who famously took 29 trips to Damascus to try to work out some kind of peace arrangement with the newly installed Bashar al-Assad. And on many of these visits, Assad's like, "What? Christopher is in a waiting room again? I'm not going to see him. I have nothing to say to him." Christopher would sit there all day, the Secretary of State, waiting to get an audience with Assad, who had made it clear probably in meeting number 3 that they had nothing to talk about. If you go through, have Secretary of State training, right? This is what you don't want to do. It's like, you don't want to be the manager. You don't want to follow the manager who had a 40 and 120 record, in his first season in Major League Baseball. And that is what Blinken is doing. But I think Blinken is doing something much more malign at the moment, which is that he's gone in, I said this yesterday, to be a human shield to prevent Israel from going into Rafah. He told them last week he was coming, so they wouldn't be able to invade over the weekend. And he's there now meeting with them. And then when he leaves, maybe, he can delay things. Other things are going on in Israel that are obviously causing emotional crises, the hostage videos and proof of life videos and stuff like that. But Hamas is going to accept no deal. And this thing where the Americans keep saying, it's such a good deal. It's like, I'm giving you the car. I'm giving you the car. I'm even
I'm
going
gonna get in trouble for this. My boss is gonna kill
salesman.
me. Okay, my boss is gonna kill me. This car has been in my family for 10 generations.
Yeah, but actually, my boss is going to kill me because it's such a terrible deal for anybody who actually wants terrorist organizations to pay a price for being terrorist organizations. That in November, the boss of Joe Biden may kill Tony Blinken and Biden for their fecklessness and misbehavior, and yet they're still fantasizing.
Well, here's my theory as to why Blinken keeps going there. Because if he's not abroad, he has to be part of the phalanx.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's
you get your steps in if you're part of the phalanx, you know.
Yeah, but very slowly. Very slowly.
There's you want to talk about shuffle diplomacy.
Also, let me ask you a question.
Can I just say something about shuffle?
What?
There's a line in Seth said, talk about shuffle diplomacy, which reminds me, and I think about this when I see this. There's a line in Don DeLillo's Underworld where he describes this peripheral character, Martin Lundy. He's an older man living in New York, buys his dinner at the supermarket for himself and walks around town. Anyway, he says Martin Lundy has a shuffle that is a comment on the literature of shuffles. That's what I see when I see Biden.
Has created the new model of shuffle. But let me ask you a question about why this may be penny wise and pound foolish. What if Biden trips? Just imagine the image.
They'll all fall with them.
They're dominoes. They all go down, and that really is the end of the presidency. Like, I'm not sure that the risk is worth it.
I mean, we're heading in that direction anyway.
We're going to grab someone on the way down. And
we're approaching the attacked by the killer rabbit phase of the Biden presidency, in my view. I mean,
that is true. And that happened a year, by the way, in Carter. The attack of the killer rabbit was in 1979. Yet that was a harbinger of the horrors to come. This is going to happen to Biden while he is seeing his poll numbers crater. And we haven't had a chance to talk to you about this either. But
yeah,
I mean, it is bad. Things are bad for Biden. He is losing in all the battleground states. The last CNN poll had it 49-43 in Trump's favor nationally, while he wins 6 of 7 battleground states, and thus has according to CNN, would have 312 electoral votes if the election were held today.
Look, the White House has a new strategy, John. They've told Playbook this morning that Biden is going to go around the country and tell the voters how his economic policies are delivering for them in the states. And he's going to go to some swing states. He's even going to go to those red states. What's with these Republicans, opposing Biden, yet they're getting the infrastructure dollars too? The president's going to point that out. And I'm sure it's really going to change the trajectory of his administration once he makes that argument for the 75th time. People are really going to start paying attention and becoming convinced of his effectiveness as president.
Well, they've not. What else are they going to do? What they're going to say? Well, if you elect Trump, there'll be roving mobs.
He could actually.
They can't say that anymore.
Look, it's getting late in the day, but our fearless leader John Podhoretz has been telling him for months now, especially since the beginning of the war in Israel, that he could be for victory. He could actually turn and confront the left. But when I look at what's happening on the campuses and his aloofness toward it, it's clear he's petrified of the loony left. He won't do anything. He won't do, and forget about the Palestinians or the Arabs for a second. It's just the loony left in general.
Yeah.
He don't want to do anything to disturb them because he fears that will completely fracture his coalition and end his presidency. But it's not looking good for him right now. That little bump he seemed to have in recent weeks has now disappeared in most polls, and Trump just seems more of a winner, bizarrely, as he's sitting in a New York courtroom most days.
I think, Abe, you pointed out you watched Trump with Sean Hannity last night, right?
Yeah, Trump was on only audio, but yeah.
Oh, sorry.
He called one of those call-ins.
Yeah. So this was a bit of a breakthrough moment for him, I think, right?
A bit, yeah. I mean, he was certainly clearer about talking about Israel and the protests than he's been before. He was talking about the chaos and that you got to crack down on the anti-Semitism specifically. He said, and he talked about cracking down the need to crack down on the protests. But he also said, Israel's got to finish the job. He said the U.S. has to let Israel finish the job, finish off Hamas fast. He said, which we've been saying too. I mean, the delay has been harmful to the overall cause.
He kind of implicitly connected the need to win in Gaza for Israel with the protests. That, I think, is the interesting wrinkle as this goes forward, which is the disorder, the fact that Biden cannot commit to an Israeli victory in Gaza has emboldened, empowered, and accelerated the protest movement. That is bad for him. It is bad for no one else. That's what's interesting. There's no way in which this protest movement hurts Trump in any way, shape, or form. It does not hurt Trump. If it hurts anybody, it hurts Biden. He is the president. They are protesting him, and he is not biting back. And nor is he biting back on the easiest possible issue on earth, which is he doesn't have to talk about the tents. He doesn't have to talk about the free speech. He doesn't have to talk about anything. He can say the anti-Semitism that we have seen, the Jew hatred, the attacks on Jews, the acceleration in hate crimes. This is among the most appalling things that I have ever seen, and I will redouble my efforts and my administration's efforts to ensure that Jewish people in America feel as safe as they have felt for the last 100 years. And the first time in 100 years that Jews are actually feeling literally unsafe in the United States, except of course for Charlottesville and Tree of Life, and that was Trump was bad, and he can throw that in. That's fine. That's a gimme. Again, there's all these gimmies that he's not taking, and if he's not taking them, there's a reason, and that's what scares me. What scares me is that the Democratic Party, with the exception of a couple of incredibly amazing people in it, like John Fetterman and Richie Torres and others, that the Democratic Party is normalizing anti-Semitism by its refusal to confront it because they're afraid of the electoral consequences of confronting it, rather than confronting it in a way that changes the dynamic of the anti-Semitic attacks.
And Biden's on board with that plan. He's become the central piece of that plan by ignoring it, by not denouncing it.
Look, I'm going to say this again. There are 400,000. There are 400,000 Arabs in Arab Americans in Michigan, and he's afraid of them. I believe there are 500. I've got to look it up. There are 400 and something thousand Jews in Pennsylvania, and he better be afraid of them. I mean, I am not saying that they're all going to vote for Trump, because I think many more are going to vote for Trump than people realize if things keep going the way this is going. Not about Israel. It's about anti-Semitism in the United States and the fear of the Democratic Party in confronting it. And you know what? He can lose Michigan, but he can't lose Pennsylvania. There is no map that you draw of Biden in which he can lose Pennsylvania.
And Pennsylvania's governor has been on the right side of this stuff. Pennsylvania's governor has been,
and its senator, right?
And its senator too. But it has a Jewish governor who was a human firewall during the last elections. Josh Shapiro was almost unbeatable in that election, and he was supposed to be an indication of how you become unbeatable in Pennsylvania, right? He was a blueprint. Here's a swing state. Here's how you hold off public discontentment with Democrats nationally in a swing state. And they have not used that at all, and they have not elevated his voice, and they've sort of tried to ignore that he's speaking at all, when in fact he's still saying and doing the right things as a governor of the swing state.
Matt, let me ask you this. I wrote a book 30 years ago called Hell of a Ride, which was about the collapse of the first Bush administration. going from 91% approval in March 1991 to getting 38% of the vote in 1992, having gotten 53% of the vote in 1988. And my general diagnosis of the problem, this suicide that George H.W. Bush, political suicide committed by Bush in the Bush White House, was that it was all a matter of spectacular cluelessness. That the people working there lived in a bubble and they did not understand how the country was turning against them, and they thought sweet reason, and they weren't going to go with the American people wouldn't go with this draft dodger or this crazy Texan lunatic or anything like that, and they just couldn't get it in their heads that they needed to switch gears, or that the fact that they were so idealist was going to be a problem. So I think that there is a record of White Houses full of the best and the brightest and all of that, who prove that they have no idea what is actually going on in the country. And I'm beginning to think that the story here is, you often want to give the benefit of the doubt, particularly to an administration that successfully got itself elected to the presidency, that they're political professionals and they know what they're doing. And I now think they don't have a clue what they're doing. They have no idea. They don't know how Biden appears to people. They don't know how to fix it if they thought it was a mistake. They're not allowed to think that Biden is a senile, doddering idiot, because that crushes the entire internal court worldview of their candidate and the person that they're working for. And so they cannot diagnose the problem or fix it. And it may be too late anyway. Bush in 92 brought in James Baker, the single greatest Republican operative of the 20th century, from the State Department to try to write his campaign and get him reelected. And Baker couldn't do it because it was too late. There was nothing to be done. Bush was Bush, and the record was the record, and Clinton had his own way of doing things, and Perot was there being a vote snatcher, and so there we were.
Right. Look, Washington's a bubble, and I think the White House is the tiniest bubble of all. And it's not just that you're removed from the rest of the country, but you have so much incoming in terms of the news and in terms of the agenda that you're trying to pursue. It's just very easy to become distracted and self-involved. This is always usually apparent when presidents run for re-election in the first presidential debates, where the incumbent tends to do horribly in that first presidential debate, simply because an incumbent president is so unused to being challenged. You consider it with Biden, who doesn't even do press interviews that could be possibly tough. There's been this ongoing feud, I haven't been around to talk about it or to note it, between the Biden administration and the New York Times, which is like, for me, the Iran-Iraq war of April 2024. Like, can't they both lose? Where the New York Times is angry that Biden gave an interview to Howard Stern, but not to the world's most influential newspaper. And the Biden administration has been snapping and sniping at the Times. That just shows you kind of how clueless they are. I mean, this is a liberal Democrat. The New York Times should be on his side, and to pick a fight with it just seems a little bit weird. But
no, what's comic is, how is the New York Times not on Biden's side? I'm sorry.
They've written tough articles about how he's a clueless old fool, according to the White House. Yeah.
Like the whole paper,
they've admitted
the whole paper is a propaganda organ for Biden. Biden administration has a proposal.
Well, their foreign affairs columnist is basically the Secretary of State,
right? No, but I mean, like, any proposal that the Biden administration puts out for the purposes of winning re-election, right? Student debt.
So why would you? Right. So that's my point.
Title IX.
Why would you waste time? Yeah, making these kind of comments to Politico playbook. I mean, the whole thing is so insular, and I think this has been a driving factor throughout this administration, which is that it seems much more committed to what's going on Twitter and MSNBC than it is to the rest of the country. The fundamental problems of this administration have been apparent from the first year: inflation, immigration, and disorder on the world stage, beginning with the Afghanistan pullout. And they've done nothing to address them. And then there was also, not just very briefly, before we go, another story that I wasn't around to talk about was apparently this attempted coup against Karine Jean-Pierre, where senior administration officials tried to gently nudge her to leave the administration at the end of last year. And she said, "I'm not going anywhere." And they said, "Okay." And so they've left this complete incompetent as the press secretary, and they have this, this arrangement that we've made fun of for years, where for anything important, Admiral Kirby has to come out and push her to the side and address, and then she can come back to the podium and the lectern and read her prepared notes about whatever woke initiative the administration is pursuing today. The stories of incompetence have been piling up recently, and that's not good.
She's Bartleby the Scrivener, and she says, "I prefer not to." She's sitting there at her desk.
Okay, Karine.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say you have given me an idea for an improvisatory commentary recommends.
Oh, I have
just
a
said before you have one.
Okay, you have one, and I don't have to.
Before you do the recommends, just want to say before you do the Karine Jean-Pierre, graduate of Columbia's, she has a master's of public affairs from Columbia's International Affairs School, does she not?
Well, if she does,
now you can see where the savvy people do.
That's the one subject she's not allowed to talk about as press secretary. So I guess that degree really stood her in excellent stead. Is all I want to say. Just want to say, before you get to yours, that I was put in mind. I was going to recommend the Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, 2,000-Year-Old Man albums, all of which are on YouTube, by the way. You can listen to them in their entirety. And there are obscure sketches that aren't the 2,000-Year-Old Man, the single greatest comedy sketch ever done. But there are obscure second-level sketches that are also on these albums, some of which are funny, some of which are not so funny. But there's one called the LMNOP Ad Agency, in which Mel Brooks plays a lockjawed guy who works for an ad agency on Morrison Avenue called the LMNOP Agency. And Carl Reiner says to him, "How do you make it clear to someone that he really should move on and not work for you anymore?" And Mel Brooks says, "Well, you institute a vicious whispering campaign." And Carl Reiner says, "You mean go around saying he's not good, he probably should look for another job?" No. You go up to him and you whisper in his ear, "Get out by Tuesday or we'll break your teeth." That's the vicious whispering campaign. The Biden administration, of course, not having taken the lesson of the LMNOP ad agency, just saying, "Why don't you leave?" And she says no. And they're like, okay. Yeah. All right. So recommendation.
Yes. Thank you, John. Today, I'd like to recommend a book I read over the weekend. The book is Shakespeare, the Man Who Pays the Rent by Judi Dench, the celebrated actress. This book is basically it's an oral history, a series of conversations between Judi Dench and an interlocutor, fellow actor and Shakespearean director. And it goes basically role by Shakespearean role in Dame Judy's stage career. And what I loved about it was not only her sense of humor, she's 90 years old now, but also you learn a lot about Shakespeare and the plays, and not just how a great actress approaches certain roles, but the plots, some of the texts. There are Shakespeare plays I've never seen or read. I got to learn about them. The comedies really come out that you're reminded of Shakespeare's genius. If you were a fan of the Bard, such as like I am, you will like this book. If you want to learn about Shakespeare, I think this is actually a very good introduction, especially if you've seen Judi Dench's more famous film roles like Shakespeare in Love, or she played the character M in a whole slew of James Bond films. This is a good way to get into Shakespeare, and it will certainly inspire you to read more of the plays yourself, as it has inspired me. So the book is called Shakespeare, the Man Who Pays the Rent by Dame Judi Dench.
Can I just conclude by telling a story about Judi Dench and Shakespeare? When I was 11 years old, my family took a 3-week trip to London to stay with close friends of our family. And one weekend we went to Stratford upon Avon. and we saw Twelfth Night, and I think it was 11. We saw three Shakespeare's actually, the 3 weeks. I saw Laurence Olivier in The Merchant of Venice, which wrecked me. I saw a hilarious production of Midsummer Night's Dream in Regent's Park, which was delightful. And then I saw Twelfth Night at Stratford, and the person who played Viola, the much switched girl, has a twin, and then she poses as a boy, and then she falls in love with a man who doesn't understand why his page is turning him on, and all sorts of stuff. And so it was. Then that was it. Like, I didn't know who Judi Dench was for like 20 years because she was mostly on stage and she did TV in Britain, but that stuff didn't come here. But when I saw her in something in the early 90s, I was like, oh my God, that's that woman who was in Twelfth Night. And she was astounding. Like, and she must have been 30, 25. I mean, she's 90 now. So no, she would have been older. She would have been, I guess, 40 or close to 40. Yeah. Playing a 20-year-old girl. And it was like one of those performance so indelible that even though I hadn't known her name at the time or had any experience of her, I instantly recognized her several decades later because she had made such an unbelievable impression.
Well, she talks about that role and that production. When you read the book,
okay,
take a trip down memory lane, John.
I am excited. So that is Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent by Judi Dench. We'll be back tomorrow for Abe Seth and Madam John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.